here, believe it or not.
Behind the camera.
Behind the camera, that is the camera. With the microphone. We are broadcast on Facebook Live. And you can watch the video afterwards. For those of you that were kind of wondering, what did we miss? We had kind of a small, intimate meeting prior to this. Talk about details between the applicants and immediate neighbors. So that's what that was, and invited most to stay. So welcome to our council meeting. Dave Richards, our land use chair, and Judy Short. They handled a lot of our land use questions. Am I missing?
Jeremy Hickinson was here a little earlier, or as representative, I'm sorry,
Yes.
or as Nancy is neighbor,
Nancy's here.
to drop off
Yes.
our banner. Thank you, Nancy, for doing
You're
that.
welcome. We rigged it ourselves without any instructions.
All right.
Maybe in Chinese. Normally, and I hope you don't mind, Dave, normally we start with fire department. They're not here. We don't know if they show up. We always for calls, and then we usually invite our detective, Dave King. We have Erin Mendenhall, council chair for District 5, who's with us tonight, and she has asked that she have precedence at the beginning of the meeting and be excused for family from out of town. So Erin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate your flexibility with me tonight. Normally I stay and chat with you after, and if you want to chat with me, just take my cell phone. Most of you in this room have it. 801-864-1222. And I'll tell you again at the end if you didn't get your pen out fast enough. So the council's into the budget now, and the mayor presented the budget the first week of May. We have until the middle of June to finalize it. And we're still sort of unpacking it, but I'll tell you that one of the things we were just talking about has to do with Liberty Park. And some of you might have participated about 15 months ago in a community survey that was Central City, ELPCO, and Liberty Wells. About 500 residents took an online survey about the experience of Liberty Park, what you wanted to feel more of, what you wanted to feel less of, and some solution ideas. And the mayor's administration actually put a staff person in charge of helping the community coalesce the conversation. And the outcome of it was very much centered around a park ranger pilot program desire. And this, the mayor's recommended budget contemplates a park ranger pilot program. And it looks at 1 administrator and 5 staff people, all of whom are police officers. And this program would be run through the police department. And the proposal as it stands right now is that they would be officers in officer clothing, and they would be able to respond to criminal activity or to call in resources, whether it's the VOA or some of our own police officers, social workers, or police department social workers. And we were just talking about that kind of the difference between a park ranger, or as we imagine a park ranger, and a police officer, and that different demographics may have a different response or feeling of security or feeling of insecurity with people dressed differently. So this was a big subject of conversation at the council meeting on Tuesday, and there were council members saying, we don't want park rangers who are actually police officers and look like police officers, and that's not the aesthetic or the experience that this conversation was trying to create. And I think that people like George are saying, no, we do want police officers, and nobody's, I'm paraphrasing, people aren't afraid of a police officer. It makes you feel better. And so I'd love to hear from you as we have this conversation, because I think that the council is going to weigh in heavily on this proposal. I do want a park ranger program. I think it's a wonderful idea, particularly as we're looking at opening our 2 new homeless resource centers in July. And who knows when the state's going to close the road home. That's not a known date at this point, but it will close at some point. And we have a lot of transitioning to do, and we have a lot of unknowns, frankly, in my opinion, about what is going to happen And will the new homeless resource centers really take the pressure off of some of the public spaces that have felt an increased presence since Operation Rio Grande? So I'll tell you, in terms of the budget right now, I see that the administration has decreased funding for a lot of the support services around the city to help individuals experiencing homelessness connect with services, get to places that can help them. They're decreasing that as a result of the opening resource centers, and I think it's premature to do that. I think we're going to have, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. We hope that the resource centers are going to serve the needs that they're designed to, but there's going to be a transition time. So I'm going to work to rebuild that services budget so that we can see this time through, at least through the next fiscal year, and be able to respond to needs as unpredictable as they may be at this point in time. So I'd love to hear from you about that aspect, and also the Park Ranger pilot program, which is at this point presented to be dispersed all over the city, from Jordan Park to Jordan River Parkway, up into Rose Park, Liberty Park, and I believe Fairmont was the other.
All 67.
Not all 67. There's 6 or 7 parks proposed in the pilot program. So talk to me. I'll tell you my number. Yeah, right now. Great.
My first question is, are the uniforms for these park rangers, which is the end of it?
Exactly.
Could they make them look more like?
That's what we're asking. Tell me about, so that's what the council has been asking. Tell me about why you feel that way, if you
Because
can.
they look friendlier, and they look,
With no offense to Detective King, you're very friendly.
because I'm not doing anything wrong. But, no, I
But let's
appreciate them so
acknowledge
much,
that you
but
don't
I think it just
necessarily-
has a softer, friendlier look, and
Yeah.
if it is truly park rangers do different things than our regular police, no?
Well, hey,
Not in this
George, she
case.
can have her opinion here.
Well, no, I mean, but isn't it an expanded
What are we solving for?
obligation?
Are we solving for criminal activity, or are we solving for a feeling of safety and some oversight of the park?
So it's nothing more than police work, it's not like they don't do any other outreach
I will
rather
say,
than.
our police officers are asked to do far more than just criminal dealing,
Oh, yes.
resolving.
Yes.
They're social workers, they're family therapists, they do a lot of work. So, but yeah,
Because
as it's proposed, it's
has
just that.
Has that been proposed or suggested, or is that possible?
In my recollection of the community survey that happened and all the conversations we've had in here and that I've had with Liberty Wells Community Council, the desire was for a park ranger experience, not a police officer experience. Although police are welcome in the park, but that wasn't the outcome we were
I
necessarily looking
guess,
for.
I understand what she's talking about. Is, the feel is more, when you talk park ranger, it's more environmental.
That's
Okay?
what I thought, I didn't know
Versus
that all of them
security.
did police.
Even though park rangers do all the same things, but they do it on government land. I mean, of course, it's a different aspect. But is it more for the park aspect, or is it more for security access?
That's the conversation that we're asking for. And the outcome of the community conversation in that survey, in the interpretation I have of it, is that it's more of the whole experience of, and not just a criminal aspect. And I want to acknowledge that it's not only people who are doing something wrong that feel intimidated by an officer in uniform. There's a whole, we don't need to like hypothesize about this. There's plenty of research nationally and locally about different demographics experience with an officer in uniform. And I think that's part of the issue here. Ursula?
Well, tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember ever hearing anybody discuss the need for a park ranger until safety became an issue. I mean, it's not like they're going to give guided tours of Liberty Park
Right.
or examine rock formations or,
Yeah.
a lot of the things that park rangers do.
Well, so this is my sixth spring on the council, and I can think back to some gang-related shooting activity, a stabbing, that were not I think they were prior to Operation Rio Grande. I mean, there's been some safety insecurity feelings in the park probably long before. A lot of you have been walking Park Loop for a long time. But I think Operation Rio Grande increased a presence of people, at least the perception was, it increased a presence of people that made park goers sometimes feel insecure.
Right,
So,
yes.
yes.
So that brings up my question. I wonder if they're going to be on bicycles, and are they going to be armed?
Yes, and they will also have a vehicle.
Oh, okay.
And part of the desire I have, do you remember back when it was our CIU at the time who said, why don't you guys work to bring back the bike squad? And I got the bike squad reinstated about 4 years ago. The desire was to keep them bike squad, that was their job. But then Operation Rio Grande happened, and we found that the administration of the police department would flex them into the downtown area, and they wouldn't be in the parks. That's part of the desire of this. If we're really going to do a pilot program where we're going to measure the baseline after the pilot program or during it also, we need to know that they're in the parks, not that they're half the time being pulled to other assignments. So the bikes help us have a feeling of placement, but
You can't
they'll have
drive a
both.
car around the park.
Yeah, so they would have, the Chief Brown told us on Tuesday, they would have access to a car and they would have bikes in the parks to go between parks on the
Oh, I
bikes,
see.
or on the cars with the bike rack. Any other feedback? Okay, I'm not gonna do a straw poll of uniforms, no uniforms, but yeah.
I'm always in the park too, and are they gonna have a small substation?
We haven't talked about that. And there was not a capital request to build anything new. But I'll tell you that since we brought Bike Squad back, that our Youth City building has opened their doors and welcomed officers to come in and fill their water, use the bathroom, interact. So I think that that there are resources.
So one of the actual buildings here is already here, or anywhere?
Our partners in this park, including Tracy Aviary, are, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Detective King, that they're fabulously welcoming to the bike patrol. And I think that, I haven't heard that there's any need for an additional substation or anything like that.
You can put them in the unused cafe.
There you go. Could have a little corn dog stand.
That's not gonna happen, is it? I mean, we're not gonna have our cafe back, I guess. I'd love
So-
to come to breakfast over there.
I'll tell you that I don't want to get into the numbers of the budget right now because literally every week it's in flux, but what we're looking at is more money for the implementation of our transit master plan, which we predicted. Streets, we've now hired up the maintenance group, so we doubled our streets maintenance crew and their trucks and tools to do that job. That was with the sales. And so the mayor's recommended budget continues to flow the money as the community really designed in the funding our future process to say, this is where we want that new money to go. We're seeing that that's where it's recommended to continue going. And a reminder that August, I believe it's 11th, is the UTA change date. That every year they change the system on that date, whatever changes are going to happen. And we're looking forward to our 21st South, 9th South, and 2nd South bus routes starting at that point. And those are every 15 minutes, 7 days a week. They're basically circulator buses. They're going to go back and forth. I would love to see that we start to have to ask, do you mean 9th and 9th West or 9th and 9th East? Because that kind of connectivity is critical to a growing city like this. The segregation that we have experienced as a city can partially be addressed through better connectivity. So 9th South is exciting, of course. We want you to not have to look at a map or pull up a bus schedule and just be able to go, I know it's going to be here, it's worth waiting. Can I answer any questions or field any hopes for you out of the budget?
Money for funding of park employees? They seem to be stretched so thin.
Yeah, so public services is going, I believe that they come before us next Tuesday on the 28th. I should double check that for you though. And honestly, I can't recall off the top of my head if there's a change in the full-time employees for park services yet. The budget, as you know, is so big that it's like eating an elephant. So we do it in pieces, and there's some key changes, but I'm sorry, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you, Judy. Anything else? Come talk to us if you want to. Tune in. It's exciting. Channel 17 in Salt Lake City. You can watch us debate over the budget starting at 2 o'clock on Tuesday. We have a formal meeting, and we always love to hear from you. And I'll tell you my phone number one more time in case you don't have it. And you can call or text me. Please tell me who you are if you text me. And I'm here for you. So my number is 801-864-1222. I have to put one phone. I do turn my phone off when I go to bed.
On Channel 17, is that what?
Say what? Sorry?
When you say it's Channel 17, is that Comcast or Dish or, I mean, do we know
Does anyone
what the
know?
name of the channel is so we can find it?
It's public access.
Public access.
TV.
Yeah, but it's also on the internet,
Yeah, it's live
also on
stream.
Facebook and YouTube.
Yeah. Honestly,
Or if you just go to
I've never been
Salt Lake.
home to tune in
Okay,
for 6 years, and I used to just live stream it, so.
okay.
Anything else? Thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me go tonight to be with my family.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
I think Detective King's next. And by the way, on the back of your program agendas, there's lots of names, contact, emails, columns, etc. Detective King is our detective from the police department for community council. And he would invite you to get hold of him if you have questions, concerns, and he'll respond.
So I've been talking to you yet again. My name is Dave King with the police department, and just kind of looking over some of the numbers. If you've ever gone on and looked at our data, it's right on our website, so you can kind of see where the trend is. You can see what's going on across the entire city and what's going on in your general area right here. And just generally, if you look at it, the way it's broken down is they have the last 7 days compared to the last 7 days compiled over 5 years. So the way they look at it, they compare 7 days, and then they have the same week for 5 years, and then they break it up. The only thing that really was a little bit of an increase for this area that showed on there was a business robbery. It showed there was one where compared over the last 5 years at the same time, there's like 0.6. And looking at that, all it was a retail theft that the employee got assaulted, and so it got turned into a robbery. It wasn't anything more than that, but everything looks like it's still on a downward trend. We're doing really good about not leaving keys in cars, not leaving cars running. It's warm, so a lot of people aren't doing that right now.
Who says it's warm?
What's that?
Really?
I think it's great outside. I love it. If you could say it like this, I'd be happy. But it is going to get warm, and I want to remind people, don't leave garage doors open unattended, don't leave stuff out. I can't remember if I reported last time, but we have seen within the last month or so that there has been a little bit of an increase in some areas with garden tools and different stuff. That's always something to think about, especially with the summertime. One of the things I did want to bring up that we're kind of seeing, I don't think I've seen any reports specifically for this area. I know District 6 has had issues, but people that have like those white vinyl fences, some people are having fun running through them and just doing a lot of damaged property to them. They could get a kick out of just running through them, just destroying them. So that is an issue we're having kind of more on the District 6 side, and Detective Peterson was here, he's over there now, and he's trying to figure out what he can do, but pay attention, just kind of what's going on. If you have neighbors or if you yourself have any of those vinyl fences, just try to pay attention, watch out, and any kind of tips would help out. I haven't really looked a whole lot into it, but I think a lot of it's just juveniles just doing their thing, just going out, being around. So if you guys have any video or anything like that can help us out, feel free to reach out to us and we'll see what we can do to help out with that kind of stuff. But that's kind of just some of the general stuff that's going on. Does anybody have any questions or concerns? George, get your hand up.
13 South, 11th East accidents.
Yes.
Did you check that?
I did,
And
and I'm gonna have to get back to you because I checked on it and I haven't seen it and I forgot what it was. I apologize.
okay, we also asked traffic engineering to check it out. So,
I'll go out and I can get on my computer. I can go talk to you before you leave here today.
okay.
This would be like hub and spoke in Kyoto, that area?
Montessori.
You said 13 South and 11th East, George?
Yes. Remember, we and the fire department both said that there were problems with traffic flow and.
And a lot of that was, there was construction on 13th, right?
Yes, that's part of it.
Yeah.
But there was a crash that went into the white fence on it, right in front of the Montessori.
The Montessori school.
Took it out.
Ursula, you live on 13th,
That's
right?
what I
Huh?
You live on 13th, right? Have you noticed the traffic change since the
yeah.
construction has moved further down?
Yeah.
13th, okay.
11th East
Or
used
11
to be
or-
a breeze. 11th East is a pain in the butt now.
Okay. Got it.
So I think last time I looked at it and I got sidetracked. Saw somebody dinging the keys in front of me or something. And I forgot to talk to you about
That's
that.
okay.
So I'll go look at it.
Okay, and if you do see a large increase in accidents, just tell traffic engineering this is an issue. So that's who we need to have fix it.
Anybody else? I think I put my information on the flyer, but my number, the 801-799-3624, or if you don't have the flyer, you can't remember, you can get onto the Salt Lake City's website, and there's a spot where it says find my CIU officer, and my information's on there. Feel free to contact me with any questions or concerns or anything like that. All right?
Okay. Thanks, Detective.
Do you want me to do the camera?
That's all right, I'll try not to. I'll keep myself in a little box. So, thanks for everyone for coming in tonight. Jason Stevenson, one of the co-chairs of ELPCO. And we had in a meeting that I want to give a recap for in case those of you who couldn't make it or didn't see the video online. Back on May 8th, which actually is Victory Over Europe Day, something that maybe only I celebrate as a World War II buff, we had a meeting over at the about 9th and 9th parking. This was a meeting that followed our April ELPCO meeting where this issue was also discussed. We had 140 people show up at that May 8th meeting over at Youth City. Really filled the whole place up. And it was a facilitated discussion with Salt Lake City and ELPCO, really trying to get to the bottom of this issue, describe some of the new changes to the 9th South reconstruction plan and the parking implications of that the city had made. There were quite a few people speaking, both from the business community, residents, people who lived all around, and it was a pretty good meeting. We only expected about 40 or 50 to show up, and when people kept on coming through the door, we're like, okay, people really want to talk about parking. This is good. The way it ended up was that you had the city go and figured out how to add back 9 more spots in strategic areas along 900 South. Originally, there were going to be 29 spots reduced due to the construction that you've probably seen going on right now. They were able to add back 9 more spots, so there's going to be a net loss of 20. Also said that they are going to look at trying to add back a couple more spots if it's feasible as the construction continues. And also the city said they're going to convene a parking study that they're going to look at. I think I put it in the agenda. 3 different areas. One is what is the usage, how are people using parking, what is the impact of this project on the parking, and what is the long-term impact as the 9 line and actually really all of 9 South develops. As probably you've seen, a lot of buildings coming up, new residential down at Central 9th and so forth. So the project's going to continue. All those orange cones are already out there right now. You've probably been weaving your way through, just like we all have. And it will go until about October. The parking study, though, will start pretty soon. And they're going to probably have some more workshops and convenings and public meetings like we've had leading up to this project. I do recognize a lot of faces of folks who were at the meeting. Robert, I think you were there, right? Right, yeah. So I'm just wondering, was there any feedback that folks had about anything that you wish would have been discussed? Or maybe that we can continue to talk about?
We've talked a little bit about this. I think the business community needs somebody going door to door, business to business, letting them know that Salt Lake City has some tools to keep the businesses in business, because I'm hearing that they're ready to close their doors permanently.
That they're worried that the construction's going to cost
gonna
of
get
acres. Yeah. So one of the silver lining, I guess you could say about this is that we now have a 60 or 70 email list of all the night-to-night businesses, which ELPCO's never had before. We've developed a really good now communication with them. And just last week, I think Helen, who owns the Stockist, 9 to 9, she put out an email saying, hey, look, business community, emailing all these folks, we need to band together, like George was saying. Let's do something in July, like a walk party, a block party to bring people down to 9 to 9. And ELPCO is going to help out with that, and we will try to connect them to other resources of the city. You know, there's a city on that helps with businesses, or is that only in
Yes, he
certain
works for
areas?
Sugar House.
Yeah, you don't get it.
He also
How
does,
much are you paying them?
no, he works for Ballpark
5
too,
years.
but his contract's up.
Because I remember he helped with the construction on 300 South
Yeah.
when the bike lanes went in there.
Okay, he does need to be, you need to push the administration to have him pick up, because his contract's up, I think, this week,
Okay.
or next week, and yes, somebody like him is needed, but there's also, we talked about this, the Economic Development Department has a business retention group, Roberta something or other, and she's the one who should be going door to door.
Okay.
I mean, in Sugar House, they offered loans, they even transplanted one of the businesses, helped out on that. So
Okay.
whatever it takes, keep the businesses here and keep our eclectic character is important.
And in our most recent newsletter, we really put a call out for, hey, if you need pizza, go to Pizza No No. You know, if you need a gift, go to Hip and Humble. You know, direct your shopping towards 9th and 9th. Give a little bit of an extra tip if you can to those businesses. To the
Well,
employees.
Almexo's already bailed, haven't they?
Almexo Bell, we've heard that there will be someone new coming into that area. And then Charlotte's is going to become a bridal shop. Charlotte's, the business up right by the roundabout, that's going to become a bridal shop. So,
Maybe Vessels will wait to open till the springs.
yeah, well, I mean, and what we can do with our feet and with our pocketbooks can help as well. So, as residents of ELPCO, we don't necessarily need those parking spots, but I think we need to recognize that the businesses get a lot of their sales come from people who drive in. So, yes.
I wasn't at the meeting, but it really amazes me that all this took place, or it seemed to have taken place without any input from the community, and everything's being done on the back end. I don't
No.
understand, how can we be on the
Sure.
front end of these things in the future?
So there have been community meetings going back almost 2 years on the 900 South reconstruction project.
Well, I know it's been about the roundabout.
Yes.
I don't know about
Parking, and that was where it slipped through the cracks, because no one really brought up parking during
Yes,
those
I did.
meetings.
Well,
Some
yes.
people did, you're right.
Yes,
Sorry. Some people did, but it wasn't one of those top line concerns. The roundabout really drowned out everything else. So it wasn't until they kind of got the project into place last fall that we realized, that the city realized and the business community realized, oh wow, we're going to lose a lot of parking spaces. So it was a little bit late, and I think there were some mistakes made with that, but also it was a part of the design project that they couldn't give a round number about how many parking spots.
Jason,
would
I
cost.
think that was a little disingenuous on their part.
On whose part?
On the city.
The city's part.
When you design projects, you early on see where you're going. Especially something where you're losing that many parking spots.
And that's an issue.
That's just
an
hard to
issue
accept.
In this neighborhood forever. Parking is ridiculous.
I think we will definitely put that on the top of any new future project that comes, whether it's small scale or large scale, like we have with Mine South. Yes.
I just have one comment about
Yeah.
that. That was the primary thing that I talked to the head of the project when we had this circle where we go from like section to section
Kind of
of
the
the
round,
project.
yeah.
Yeah.
Was that over at the other building on Tracy?
It was.
Yeah.
And the thing I talked to her about for a long time was, where's the parking going to be? Can you create more parking? And she completely blew me off on that. She's like, well, you don't know anything about parking, do you?
Ouch.
You know? Yeah. And I said, well, take these green spaces and make some more, you know, angled parking. And so that got completely
Who
blown
was
off.
it?
What's that?
Who was she?
It was the woman with the dark hair.
Oh, who's,
She was short,
temporary.
dark hair, I don't remember her name. She was
Temporary
involved. She wasn't very temporary. She was
But she's doing the job, she's getting used to it.
Well, I don't know what it was.
So, okay, so you brought parking up, it didn't make it
I'm really
into
sorry, I wasn't
the
there.
good discussion. Yeah, I mean, I think we all learned from that, and I think also the city, by responding the way they did to add back as many spots as they could, they realized they'd made some mistakes and left that out of the conversation. I mean, ultimately, this is kind of a clash between those that are car-based, you know, and think about parking and cars, and those that think a little about multimodal transit and bikes and
It
pedestrians.
shouldn't be that way, though.
I know, but it's being written down by that sort of blue team, red team approach,
But you know,
so.
it's interesting because we have the same team of planners in transportation working on the McClellan Trail, which goes from 21st South to the streetcar. And parking is the top issue on that.
Especially down near Sugar House and
Right.
by that below 21%.
So you would think that that would be on their mind.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
I brought this up before, but the last time we had a big project on 9 South,
Mhm.
they put in nice grass, sod, trees, and a few years later, nothing. I mean,
It was all dead?
yeah,
Yes.
all those trees.
Mhm.
Is there some way to mitigate that? I mean, if you were a business, or if you're a property owner, maybe you pay $200. If it's still alive in 5 years, you get it back. I mean,
You know, at the May meeting, I think Tom got that exact question
Oh,
about, and I think, George,
okay.
you were the one who asked it. Or maybe someone sitting next to you. Like, what is the maintenance going to be like on this project for both the new bike path as well as the sort of new landscaping that goes with it? The city's going to maintain the bike path, you know, sweep it for snow, do all that stuff. The greenery, they said, is not going to be any bigger than it was before based on sort of the way the
but
path is
if you walk
expanding.
up,
But I think they're
it's
going to
just a
hook it into
waste.
the existing irrigation systems that are
Really?
there, so.
Well, they
but
don't get mowed,
But-
I mean,
That's something we've got to keep on. I think it is up to the property owners to do the mowing. though,
it
Because
is.
it's still.
But all along 9 South, those are all absentee owners.
Mhm.
Doesn't get done.
It's something we got to watch as a community council to make sure the city does it and also the community does its part.
All through the city, people don't take care of the park strip.
Well, I
They
don't
think it's
either.
city land.
I'm sorry,
Well,
I'm one of the worst,
no,
but I,
we have some
nobody-
really nice parking strips here, walkable, beautiful, well-kept flowers, gardens on the park strip, so.
Yeah.
well,
But I agree,
like I
we
said,
have
I'm
big
not
park
one of them,
strips,
but the city did
and maybe
put
we
in-
can use them for more parking.
You know, where I'm from Akron, Ohio, and we call them devil strips there because the devil knows who owns it. That's actually where it comes from. You can tell someone's from Akron because that's what the term is. Other questions about that meeting?
I don't have a question about the
Yeah.
meeting, but on 9 South, they're ripping up all these old railroad ties.
Yeah.
Why? Why are they spending the money to do that? Why do they have?
I think they're going deep enough into the asphalt, into the ground, and putting in different kinds of materials that they need to do that. George?
They had to
been more
do the
meetings?
same thing on 9th East because they are streetcar tracks, and if you just dig out the rails, the creosote logs actually create a wave on the street. You have to take the logs out, the rails out, otherwise you're going to get a wave effect after a couple
Well,
of
why are
years.
they taking them out at all? What's
I think they're
Because
going deep enough to
they-
have.
deep
They
enough
have
to
to
do
eventually.
what? What are they doing?
Putting in new asphalt and maybe even concrete in some areas.
See, the logs don't compact as well as the road base. So what happened on 9th East, they had to replace the whole road after 5-10 years. So if they don't take out the logs, the same thing will happen on 9th South.
It is pretty interesting to look at that big jumble of metal. I don't know if it's still there, that was on 9 South. We took some photos of it for ELPCO. Because those are about 100 years old.
I mean, I guess, yeah, I
Yeah.
guess if they're going really deep to do whatever they're doing.
Yeah, it's almost like baking a cake. You can't have a bad layer in there. You know, it's going to upset everything above it. So you
It's
need to
been
make
there for
sure.
so long, you'd think it would have been settled and.
Like dinosaurs, right, yeah. Hopefully they'll find some dinosaurs then. Other questions about 900 South? Obviously, this is an issue ELPCO is going to follow. And we've even heard that they're starting to move towards Central 9th and doing some more work over by Liberty Park and in that area. So that 9 South corridor is going to get development over the next couple of years. So, cool. We'll stay tuned. We'll have some more exciting meetings, I'm sure. Daryl, what's next on our agenda?
I think Nanette is up next. You want to introduce her?
Yeah, the ADU discussion, right? Okay. Actually, we have a quick little presentation. Can we do that first, Nanette, before we, or is that all right?
Yeah.
Just to get everyone up to speed. We wanted to talk a little bit about ADUs tonight writ large, we had a pre-meeting that happened about 6:30 where we discussed 3 individual projects that came up. And what I did is I put together a little PowerPoint, don't tell my boss, he's during work hours, about ADUs so that we can all be kind of on the same speed and have the same information about it. Let's see if I can get this working. So an ADU is an accessory dwelling unit, also known as a mother-in-law suite. Back in October, Salt Lake City Council passed an ordinance allowing ADUs to go citywide. After about 10 years of debating this, they finally got all the votes they needed to make ADUs available citywide. And it's actually been quite interesting to watch what's happened. I think some people weren't quite sure whether we're going to see a flood of ADUs or just a trickle. It was a bit of a gamble to see what would happen. Here in ELPCO, we've had one ADU already proposed at 932 Princeton that happened back in January. Meeting and talked to the homeowners and the contractor, and we thought it was a good idea. And then today we had 3 that we were going to discuss. We ended up only discussing the one on Emerson and the one on Lake Street. The one on 1000 East, they wanted to go back to the drawing board, literally, to get some new designs. But you can see just even within the small confines of ELPCO, we've seen quite a few. Sugar House, Judy, you guys have seen some, right?
I think 3, maybe 4.
3 in Sugar House. I know there's been others over in Liberty Wells. It's something that definitely is going to catch on. The city passed the ordinance to try to deal with some of the affordable housing crunch that is happening in their city. And so this is what the ordinance put together, and I got this from Building Salt Lake. I'm going to put this presentation up on our Facebook page, and it'll go out in our next newsletter as well in case you want to look more carefully. But ADUs are allowed citywide, no boundary requirement. Off-street parking is required unless the home is on a street with illegal on-street parking or is within a quarter mile of transit, which would be a bus or a trolley or tracks. And there's some size. They have to be 50% or less of the square footage of the main residence with an overall cap of 650 square feet. So you kind of got to fit into that range. And this is something that was interesting that, if you have detached sheds and things like that on your property, that isn't counted towards any of the square footage stuff. It's just the main residence and the ADU. And the height cannot exceed the height of the main home, although there are other limitations. If it's 24 feet if homes with pitched roofs and 20 feet for homes with flat roofs. I think one of the ones we saw today has a 17-foot roof. So, they're trying to stay in those zones. The ownership requirements are a little bit more expansive than they were before. It used to have to be owner occupied either in the ADU or in the main house. Now there's a little bit more co-owner, trustee of a family trust and things like that. So there can be a little bit more. And when you sell an ADU or sell a property with an ADU, the people who move in have to follow the same rules. There's no sort of international water, so to speak, of ADUs once the property is sold. It has to be abided by the same stuff. If it's in a missing middle, which I'm actually not quite sure what that is, maybe Lynette, you can tell us a bit about that later. That's a zoning qualification or multifamily. You can build the ADUs without any planning division approval, besides doing all the engineering and all the other approvals that you need. But if you're in what we are actually mostly is R1, single-family residential, that's probably 90% of ELPCO is R1, single-family. You need to get what's called a conditional use exemption or process, which is coming to ELPCO and then actually going to the City Planning Commission to get approval. So most of the ADUs coming through ELPCO have to go through this process because they're basically taking a property zone for single-family and turning it into kind of a duplex, so to speak. So that's, Building Salt Lake did a great job summarizing this back in October. But if you want to learn more, there's this really excellent building an ADU guide that Salt Lake City Planning put out. I think there's some copies that we have here tonight, as well as you can use this QR code to scan it. I'll put this up later, or you can download it from the Salt Lake City Planning website. It's really handy. It's got a lot of interesting information. For instance, where ADUs are allowed based on zoning, and again, that R1 5000 is the one that is mostly ELPCO, which means that people want to build an ADU, they need that conditional use. Here's what ELPCO actually looks like in the red square right here. Everything that's yellow is R1 5000. So you can see pretty much anywhere you stick a pin, you're going to hit a single-family residential zoning. Just along the main commercial corridors, you see other types of zoning. And so all the ones that we've seen so far have been in that R1 5000 zone. You can do all sorts of cool things with ADUs. This is in that Salt Lake City planning book. Detached, above a garage, attached to a house, part of your existing house, like a basement. There's all sorts of different things you can do. The planning guide gives you some of these cool little graphics so you can get an idea. And then they even have, I guess that's a little out of focus, isn't it? Let me see if I can get that a little bit better. Yeah, well, we'll figure out that later. There's even a pretty good FAQ about what you can and can't do with an ADU. So if you're interested in this project, I know a couple of people in the audience are, get your hands on that green guidebook. It's a good place to start in terms of figuring it out. When we started approaching these ADUs back in January when the first one came through, Dave Richards, our planning use advisor, actually expert as of today, came up with these 3 questions that we want to think about, because this is a new thing for the city, it's a new thing for ELPCO, and there's some bigger questions we want to be asking. And one is, well, parking. Parking is always going to be an issue. And so Dave had the suggestion of maybe instead of requiring 1 parking spot per ADU, require 1 parking spot per bedroom. That could be a way to actually make sure that the parking isn't going to affect the surrounding neighbors quite as much. So far, we've only seen, I think, 1 bedroom ADUs come up. But there is no limitation on bedrooms. It just depends on the lot size and what you can put in and things like that.
But the
So
most space you have is 650 feet.
Yeah.
650
Yeah, I
square
think
feet.
one of
So
them we saw, Jason, was a 2-bedroom.
one of the ones today, right?
The
Okay.
one that was doing the shared, I think it was the one that was doing the shared space.
Okay. Maybe that was the one that's going back to the drawing board. Yeah. So the idea of 1 parking stall per bedroom could be a way to alleviate. Marcos, yeah.
I know that they were saying it's 650 square feet. Is that the footprint or the entire building?
That would be the whole building, right? Yeah. One of the other issues we came up with was tracking the quantity and proximity of ADUs. There's really nothing that says you can't have 5 of them on one street. So we want to make sure that as they're coming in, that we're thinking and mapping and figuring out where they are, so that we're not, as Dave wrote here, basically doing a stealth rezone of a single-family residential area into something that's more multifamily, just by having a cluster of ADUs all show up there. This is obviously something that you can't tell if it's going to happen, but you got to watch and map and figure out and see what's going to occur. So that's something that we're going to do.
The conditional use permit process would interfere on that.
I'm sorry?
The conditional use permit would show that and cause an issue.
As long as everyone
Should
knew.
cause an issue.
Right, as long as people knew what was going on down the block and around the
It's sort
corner.
of a touchy issue because, you approve one person for one and then suddenly the next guy comes in and says, well, you can't have it. That isn't really fair because you went first, but
I agree.
by the same token, you get a bunch together in the same area and it's effectively making it multifamily zoning.
And we think of it in terms of ADUs on the street. Marcus's, what he's going to be building happens to be physically on an alley.
Yeah.
And you can imagine a string of, Nanette's got her hand up to correct me, but you can imagine a string of ADUs down an alleyway having an impact on a neighborhood. Please correct me.
No, not at all. You were right, you can have multiple ADUs along an alleyway. One thing about a conditional use is conditional uses are generally approvable. It allows for planning commission to include conditions on an approved permit. So if they're meeting our standards and there's not any serious flaws with what it is that they're proposing, they're generally approvable. It just allows us to put conditions on it.
Okay, what kind of address? What do you put, a house that's facing the alley, what is their address?
Their address would be for a street address. That's 1143 Lake Street.
But the entrance is facing the alley?
So it could be 1143A and then 1143.
Yeah.
Because my neighbor has built a garage with a house on top.
I suspect it'd be a lot of people.
And you enter it from the alley.
34.
Yeah, I'm not sure how they do the addresses. Sometimes you see halves, sometimes you see Bs, sort of ways to differentiate, but Nanette sounds like you're that answer.
So if they order a pizza,
Well, you might get it. Nanette,
So these are considered to be separate from the single family, the primary dwelling on it, so everything's separate on the addressing.
so if the house is on Lake Street, is the address for
If the house
the,
is on Lake Street, then it will be a similar address, probably being assigned to the ADU.
Is the mailman going to have to go back to the
Yeah.
ADU to put the letter in the mailbox?
Daryl, can you pull the
That's
lights
a
up?
good question, and it's something that
Nanette, would you want to come on up?
We might as well transition. We don't want the slideshows.
I know while that's coming up, you like to think the mailman would bring your mail back there, but I want to warn you the way the post office is
No.
going. My prediction is we'll see those mailbox stands in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
Not too much time goes by. Lynette from planning.
Yeah, I'm Annette Larson. I am a principal planner. And I don't really have a presentation. I'm just here to answer any questions that you might have about this. To answer one of the questions that Jason raised about the missing middle. A missing middle is, it's called missing because there's not a lot of this type of housing in Salt Lake City. It's multifamily, but it's generally lower density than apartments. It's townhouses, duplexes, housing that isn't stacked on top of each other, but is horizontal units.
Fourplexes.
Yeah.
Cottage
fourplexes.
homes.
Yes.
Nanette, maybe you could start off by explaining why the ADUs came about and the goals of creating
So,
that.
City Council considered ADUs, like Jason was saying, it's been a 10-year discussion. City Council considered ADUs because affordable housing has become more scarce in the city, and there's a lot of concern about affordable housing, where it's not just the very lowest income of government assisted housing, but also people who work in the city can also afford to live in the city. And that was part of the reason why ADUs were considered in the city.
are a lot of those going to turn into Airbnbs?
So for an Airbnb, we would consider that to not be permitted in a single-family residential area. The reason why is the way that you're renting it. You're renting it daily, which is considered to be, I believe, a hotel. If you rent it monthly, it's also not allowed because it would be considered a rooming or boarding house. It would be a typical lease, I believe it has to be annual lease, typical lease dwelling unit.
So you're saying Airbnb or anything like that is really not allowed?
It's not allowed, no.
It's being done.
But it's allowed with the regular house to live in, right?
It's not, but it's also being done with regular houses.
It's not, but it is? What are you saying?
It's being done, but it's not
But
allowed.
it's illegal.
Yes.
So why are you letting them do it?
It works on basically code enforcement, right?
Exactly.
So someone has to call to complain, and then they can come out and investigate and issue a fine.
So you don't enforce anything unless somebody complains?
The city's large enough that it's very difficult to enforce, to even know that it's happening, first of all, because it's
Well, all you
difficult
have to do
know.
is look on the Airbnb site.
No. The legislature won't push the issue and force Airbnb to give us the addresses. So,
All you have to do is sign up and search, do a search.
yeah, you search, you can search, but Salt Lake City isn't doing that, and every time they try to do that, the legislature says, no, we already have an agreement with Airbnb. They pay taxes, and it's from to Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City is trying to get the legislature to allow or force Airbnb to give us the actual rentals, not listing, but the actual, when they rent, the address, so we can go and make sure it's not overwhelming the community. And that's the issue. It's a legislative issue, because they kept clamping down on our ability to go after Airbnb. That's a real issue. But yes, you're right. It does happen in single-family home neighborhoods, and we're having a problem stopping it.
So you're gonna continue to have, you'll double the problem when you have the ADU there. Instead of one unit as an Airbnb, you'll have 2 units as an Airbnb.
I can tell you that's not what legally they're allowed to do.
But apparently that doesn't matter because you're not following the law.
Well, again, it's code enforcement. You can call on your neighbors, which is both a good and a bad thing to do, because it can lead to all sorts of interesting backyard conversations. And Daryl and I have been in a couple of meetings where this has been discussed about, what can the city do more? What can the community council do more? Ultimately, like graffiti and other issues, the city responds to complaints. And so if you call and you complain, then you can get that person fined enough that they're going to stop doing it. Whether that person, drops some dog doo-doo on your front porch and lights it on fire, I don't know. But it's one of those things that the city can't go and match photos on Airbnb to what Google Maps shows us, because that's an inefficient use of resources, really. The amount of fines you're going to get based on that kind of work isn't necessarily going to pay for the employee that's got to do that. But if there is a problem and people are complaining, then we've definitely heard of instances where people have been fined enough that they're not doing it anymore. So.
Is the square footage based on total square footage of the house, like basement and main level, or just one level?
The square footage of the house, the
Of the
50%.
ADU.
Oh, of the
You're saying
ADU.
It's,
It's, total square footage of the ADU. Now, if you combine,
I mean, is it based on total square footage of the house? And it's that.
the 50% footprint of the house, it is the total square footage of the house,
With the 6 feet.
footprint or the square footage?
It was 650.
of the square footage.
That's 650.
Are we still limited to 25, or did that limit go away?
25.
25 ADUs. I'm pretty sure that went away.
Then,
Yeah.
I know that, I'm pretty sure the city council discussed issuing or having it be mandated that if you have an Airbnb, you also have to have a business license. I supported that because Airbnb, it's invested less in the community. So if that's a concern, I think that would be worth addressing with Aaron potentially.
And then I have a question about the parking again.
Sure.
Now, you said you could have you needed one parking stall for each bedroom?
That was ELPCO's suggestion as we've been approaching these, that if parking becomes an issue, that could be a revision to the ordinance that might help resolve that. It's not a part of the ordinance right now, but it's something that Dave came up with as we were sitting down and looking at this and thinking, that could be a way to protect the parking of the
Doesn't it
neighborhood.
also say you don't need a parking stall if you're within a mile of a bus stop?
A bus stop or any other kind of public transit, I think,
Well,
right?
all of ELPCO is within a quarter mile of a bus stop.
It didn't used to be just a bus stop, it was just a track station.
I thought it said rail up there.
It used to be, the original ordinance said a transit line, which was 4 South,
Yeah,
or streetcar to nowhere at 22nd South.
but now
It was revised in the ordinance, where they specifically said bus stop.
So, but am I wrong? When I looked at the map, all of ELPCO is within a quarter of a mile.
I have not done you can do that on the UTA, I think. You can do that on some of the bus stops. You can figure out, what is my walking distance? But I think you're probably right, that most everything is within a quarter
The
mile.
bus goes down 9th East, goes down 7th East, goes down 11th East.
11th East, yeah.
So,
Mhm.
you're within 2 blocks.
I mean, a quarter mile is what? That's about
Parking requirements, pretty lax.
1,800
in
feet,
my mind.
right?
2 blocks.
Yeah.
But I think where we see ADUs that are being done off the alleys, they're gonna typically have parking. I think they're gonna have fairly minimal impact on neighbors. But if we start seeing ADUs where they're trying to access from the main street, and then they're trying to utilize that parking on the street or the transit exemption and not provide a stall.
Well, the one on
That's where
Emerson,
neighbors are gonna complain, because people will be traipsing back and forth up and
Yeah.
down the side yard to get to the ADU and
Yeah.
back.
So one thing to consider is these are, the majority of this neighborhood is single-family residential, so ADUs are going to be conditional uses. And every conditional use, you are able to put a condition on it. And every conditional use that the city processes, we are required to notify East Liberty Park Community Council. So you'll have an opportunity to hear each ADU in this neighborhood. And if there's concerns about parking, that's something that we consider as putting a condition on parking.
And that's one reason why we notify the immediate neighbors for each project, because they're the ones who are most directly affected by any parking overflow. But you're right, sir, parking is probably, we had it as our number one issue of looking at the rollout of these new projects. What's going to be the impact? It's going to impact some streets more than others, some projects more than other projects. It's something that has a macro view, but then each site has to be evaluated as well.
and then the one on Emerson, right now there's one house there, one dwelling unit, and there's going to be, if this goes through, there will be 3 where there was 1.
3 houses?
Yes, 3 dwelling units.
Gotcha. You mean the one that we talked about
The one on Emerson.
on 825?
815 Emerson.
Is it 815? Yeah, 815. I think from what I remember from our discussion before the meeting was that it's an empty lot right now. They're going to put in a house where the gentleman who's doing the project's going to live, and then his parents are going to live in the ADU behind. So I think it would only be 2 residences there.
It went through a,
But there's a house there now.
So-
They're separate parcels.
yeah, it recently went through a
But there's no
subdivision,
house.
so a
But
property
where
line
there is
was
one house,
created.
there will be 3.
Right, but there are 2 lots, so.
Yeah.
So you're right, that used to be a one large lot. Recently,
Right.
it went through a subdivision, so a property line was created.
So you used to have 1 dwelling, and then if this goes through, there will be 3, right?
On 2 separate lots.
Right. But the same area,
It'll be a net plus 2,
The
pretty
same-
much. Yeah.
But-
amount of street footage.
That's right, but it met our requirements for the 50-foot of frontage, and I'm not sure what zone it was, but it also met our square footage requirements for that lot. So they would have been able to subdivide that lot
Yeah,
anyway
but-
without an ADU.
Whether it meets it or not, it's gonna, we had 1, now we're gonna have 3.
I actually live right there. It's 2 separate lots. There's the one where there would have been a house, there has not been a house in the last
Right.
27 years that I've been there.
Yeah.
So there's one house there and the empty lot is there, so they're talking about putting a main house and then an ADU behind it. It's still, in your vision, 2 separate lots, but it was
Yeah.
one large lot.
But 2 separate lots where there was 1.
Right, but the space is equal to the average of every home on the block.
So that it looks like all the others. I mean, these are the considerations. Each one is going to be a little unique, and, you know, if there's conditional use for most of them, which I think is what we'll have in ELPCO, we'll have the chance to dig deep a little bit more about this.
But I think people need to understand what's really going on here. We're gonna have 3 times as many families living there as we do now.
That's the point, there's a housing flood.
Yeah, and that is true. One way is to create more housing for people to age in place and things like that. So, question in the back?
Nanette, I just want to make sure, you said any of these ADUs will come through this group of people, this group, before it happens?
We get a notice and we have 45 days to have a meeting about it.
Okay.
And normally what we've been doing is having a small group meeting with the immediate neighbors, the immediate neighbors that we flyer before the regular ELPCO meeting. Now, if you guys think that we need to do something different, we'd like to hear that.
I think what you did today was good. I didn't know that was happening.
Okay.
Pre-meeting.
We try not to have the individual homeowner projects debated in the larger meeting, because then the ADU macro issue gets pushed down on their project. And these are not developers, these are just homeowners that live in our neighborhood, so they're not used to facing that fire. you know, we get Phil Winston up here, we just lob, you know, rocks at him because he's a developer and he's used to that. But we don't want to put our neighbors through that same sort of issue. So, yeah.
I have noticed more and more, some of the bigger lots that have existed have been subdivided.
Mhm.
Because, well, not only that, they're making money off these lots by selling them, but they're also creating more space. And because of the housing.
Mhm. Yeah. George and then Robert?
We did not get more zoning enforcement or code enforcement officers in our budget, I think. And that was one of the concerns when we did. So what are the chances of getting more code enforcement officers?
I can't speak to that.
I mean, that's the
think
biggest
that would be-
issue. We're told to complain, but if there's a one-year backlog on some of these, and there is, that's a problem.
That sounds like a good question for Erin, though, too, right? She's got a little bit
And
more pull on the
ELPCO should
budget.
be pushing for more code enforcement officers.
Yeah, okay,
In
and
my
that's, yeah, okay, and that's a good point, right? As we have more ADUs, we've got more issues, more
So we
Airbnb
can
that could
all
require
send
more
Erin
enforcement.
an email.
Pardon?
We could all send Erin an email.
We could.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Robert?
I've been following this issue for just a bit. I know that in years prior, I think there's been like 3 or 4 licenses permitted for ADUs. That was with the 25 ADU cap. So even though it looks like we're seeing definitely, I don't think it'll have that much of an impact on the neighborhoods. I know it's just kind of a hard fact that there's about 70,000 people trying to move into Salt Lake City proper right now. And to speak to personal experience, I remember when I was a college student and I was working away with a few jobs. I took a whole day to apply to each subsidized housing in the downtown area. And I walked to one to the next, and each one had a waiting list of about 2 months or so. So I'm a homeowner now, and I'm getting calls from these subsidized housing saying like, "Hey, you want a room?" So it takes a long time. So I just appreciate the fact that the city's taking the effort to put more housing online, especially for the missing middle.
Nanette, do you know how many ADUs have been proposed or are in process right now?
I don't know, I didn't get a count before coming here. I know that
yeah.
We have several in different neighborhoods,
Mhm.
and everyone was not necessarily surprised, but we weren't aware that it would be, people would be applying so quickly after we approved the ordinance, or after city
We've been
council.
waiting for years.
Yeah.
Nanette, the question, when, for instance, Marcus is going to be building an ADU, are the homeowners immediately adjacent notified?
That's right, if you
That's
share
what
a
I thought.
property line with that site that's proposed for an ADU, you'll be notified before planning commission. And then you're invited to planning commission. Well, everyone's invited to planning commission to come up and speak and to share their opinion. But if you share a property line with the site, then you'll get a flyer in the mail.
Thank you.
Just, okay, Chris.
Now, years ago, people in my neighborhood on the alley, built, I guess they were just studio spaces above their garage. Is the difference now they can put plumbing in? Because those houses or those units that were built years ago don't have plumbing. They weren't allowed.
So is there
plumbing.
a grandfathered provision of ADUs that people might have built them surreptitiously before or not hooked them up that they can now go and apply to make them legal?
They would have to make changes, so it would still have to meet our standards in order to make them legal. I'm not aware that we have a grandfather provision for something that was built without permits. Before, if there was like a mother-in-law apartment, but
I don't think they did have plumbing in them. I think they just
they
built for
probably,
a studio space or something.
yeah, they probably weren't considered a separate unit.
Oh.
and then they probably had shared space. And so
But if they
sometimes
wanted to do that now, they would,
for it to be considered an ADU, they would
Mhm.
have to put different utilities. If it's detached,
Yeah.
if it's attached, then it can be separate meters, but, if it's attached, I'm not 100% sure about water and sewer. I know that there would need to be a separate meter. I would assume that the water and sewer would also have to be separate, but I'll have to double check.
well, these are garages that are facing the alley and they're not attached to the primary house.
Then you're right, then everything would need to be separate.
There used to be a rule that you could have either plumbing or electric into one of those places, but you couldn't have
Oh,
both,
you
because they
couldn't
didn't
have
want
both.
people living in it.
You could have hobby shops, that's right.
Yeah, like a studio.
So that
or
could
something,
have plumbing.
so that you could do one or the other.
That's right.
Yeah.
Just to add two things. One, Building Salt Lake, which is a great website and resource in our city. It's actually got two new authors, Taylor Anderson, former Salt Lake Tribune reporter, and Luke Garrett, former city council member, just took it over. They're going to be publishing on it. They keep track of ADUs on an interactive map. I think there's about 16 or 20 last time I checked. So if you're interested about where these things are landing, you can go to Building Salt Lake. They have a map you can check. And the other thing that I think Dave mentioned earlier was that a lot of people initially went for the ADUs when the ordinance was first passed, and then realized how expensive they are, because you have to go through a lot of the permitting and all the separate utilities and so forth. So I think there was a big interest initially, and then it's only the folks that have been able to, put a plan together and afford it that have been able to push it forward, so.
Yeah, that's true. We've had a few applicants who have had to back out because they weren't aware how expensive building an ADU would be. Especially, it's specifically because of the separate utilities that's making it more expensive than people are aware of.
Plus you have impact fees.
You do have impact fees, so that's true.
They ended up just building the A instead of the ADU. Other questions? I appreciate your expert advice and
Yeah.
information here. This is very helpful.
And you're welcome to call city offices and the planning department if you have any other further questions, or stop at the building services department if you have any questions for any of the various departments that would be affected by an ADU.
Okay, thanks. All right.
Thank you.
I think it's a topic we'll be covering in the future, don't you, Darryl?
I do.
Yeah.
Not an opinion, but just a perspective that we've heard that ought to be considered when we talk about Airbnb from a city perspective and preventing them, or from a legislature perspective and advocating for them. When you think about America having property rights, there's arguments for both sides. And on the enforcement side, Jason and I became aware of an instance where a competitor looked up was able to obtain a number of addresses for competing Airbnbs and submitted them for code enforcement violations. So there's two sides to every coin.
How long did it take for them to get to code?
The city responded.
Really?
That's how we kind of became aware of that instance. So anyway, be aware that there are differences of opinion on that. And Annette, correct me if I'm wrong, but Salt Lake has had a long tradition, as Jason referred to, as mother-in-law apartments, or banishment sheds, or however you'd like to refer to them. And many of them did not conform to code for egress, for fire safety, or adequate bathrooms or anything else. And so the city's made a concerted effort over the last decade plus to increase the safety of our housing stock. And ADUs are a welcome step, many people think, to addressing not only the need for housing, but for adequate and safe housing for our residents.
Yeah, that's a good point, Darryl.
Next on our agenda, Tim Cosgrove, our mayor's liaison, graciously said, I've had a bunch of meetings this week and this weekend, and so he said, do you mind if I not come? So I would point out that he's on our agenda. His contact information is on the back of the agenda. He's very responsive, like Dave King. He acts as our liaison from our community at the mayor's office. So if you have questions or concerns, across the spectrum of whatever, don't be shy about contacting Tim to do that.
We just got one quick announcement before we adjourn, unless there's, actually first, any new business or any other issues that folks from the community want to bring up?
I'm sorry, I watch you usually on Facebook,
Yeah.
and I think it's so great, but I don't know if this is possible. You can't hear the questions,
Yeah.
and it's so great to hear you all talk up here, but if you don't know what really start to not,
Usually we
is it possible? A microphone, or maybe the person that's gonna ask the question has to go up there?
Yeah, or repeat the question. That's a really, so for our Facebook audience, and I forgot your name, ma'am.
It's Pam.
Pam. Pam asked whether or not we can have better audio for the questions from the audience. We normally do use wireless mics. We didn't do them today because we're a little short on our staff, quote-unquote staff. So the idea of running around and doing the Oprah in the audience wasn't available.
I'd be happy to run around.
So, but I have them right over there. I just didn't pull them up. We're using a general area mic on this camera, so it usually picks up pretty well from the first rows. But you're right, in the back rows, it's a little light.
We
Yeah.
want you to know that we are highly compensated as co-chairs.
Yeah, I'm sure you are.
But that's a great question, and we often also ask people, how's the audio on the live feed to see how it works. So
It's great that you,
Yeah.
that it is.
I will talk about the next meeting, and I also want to mention our city mayoral primary debate. We actually have a date for that now. ELPCO, along with 6 other community councils, including Sugar House, Landon's been helping out a lot on that, has secured a location and a date for a primary debate for the Salt Lake City mayor's race. And this is a good time to point out David Garbett, one of the candidates for Salt Lake City mayor. Appreciate you being here, David, at our meeting tonight. July 16th, I better get it right now, right? July 16th at Westminster College, Jewett Center for Performing Arts, the nice amphitheater they have there, as well as the outside atrium space. It'll be from 6 to 8 p.m., again, Tuesday, July 16th. ELPCO, Ballpark, Liberty Wells, Sugar House, let me think, Central City and Central 9th, and I'm probably forgetting 1 or 2, downtown. We're all going to combine for a pretty big mid-city community council debate. We'll invite all the candidates. Westminster College students are helping us out with it, so we're getting the next generation of voters involved. In George, are there any community council meetings on that? Where?
No,
Okay, we picked a good date.
but there might be a city council meeting.
So is George on this list somewhere?
Yeah, well, we'll see how that goes. Yeah, that's right.
Well, that's
Would it be the second Tuesday or the third Tuesday?
I haven't looked at the calendar.
Okay, well, we might have an option of switching it to Wednesday if we need, but we'll see though.
Third Wednesday is Poplar Grove.
It's the third Tuesday, so I think that actually is good.
July 16th.
It's second and fourth, yeah, July 16th.
So this is the 3rd Tuesday in July. We should be good.
Okay. Our next ELPCO meeting is sooner than that, and that'll be June 27th at Youth City, where we had our big parking discussion. We're kind of going back and forth because weddings pay and we don't, and Tracy Aviary has a wedding that night. So we get booted over to Youth City, which is actually pretty nice. They have couches, which is a benefit.
We're fans of the aviary, and we would encourage you to bring friends, family, kids to this place. They're wonderful hosts for us. They're very supportive of our meetings here.
That's right, and they've got great Wi-Fi, which is another benefit. Any other questions or comments from the audience?
Thank you.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Perry. Yeah.
Hi.
Let me just shut that off there so we're not all recording.
How are you? I was finally
Yeah.
here in town when this was going on.